Welcome to today's webinar on distributed leadership in a turnaround school, brought to you by the Regional Educational Laboratory, Mid-Atlantic. I'm Natalie Lasarena-Paquette, and I'm the Alliance Lead for the School Support and Research Alliance. And today we have two great speakers who are going to talk to you today about distributed leadership. We have Dr. Terry Hofer. At WestEd, Terry is the Director of New York School and District Services, where he provides leadership coaching and school transformation support to schools, districts, and state education departments. In addition, Terry provides school improvement technical assistance for the federally funded Mid-Atlantic Comprehensive Center and socioeconomic integration technical assistance for the federally funded Center on Education Equity. Previously, Terry served in teacher, principal, and district level administrator roles in rural, suburban, and urban school districts. He also served as the Senior Vice President of Administration and Accountability for an education management organization. We also have Edgar Lin. Edgar is the principal of Mott Junior High School, number 22 in the Bronx, New York. Mr. Lin, who brings 20-plus years experience in middle schools, is a turnaround principal who has succeeded with a team in leading the removal of Mott Junior High School from the state's persistently low-achieving under state receivership list. He's worked with Dr. Hofer to implement distributed leadership practices in his school and will share with us how he implements distributed leadership practices, as well as the lessons he's learned from implementation. Before I turn it over to Terry, I just want to tell you a little bit about the REL Mid-Atlantic. The REL Mid-Atlantic is one of 10 federally funded regional education labs funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. We serve Delaware, the District of Columbia, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. The School Support and Improvement Research Alliance, which is the alliance bringing you today's webinar, works to identify and understand effective interventions and practices to support school improvement and turnaround through the development and provision of training, coaching, and other technical support. So you can see that today's topic is very timely and closely related to the work of our alliance. We are so pleased to have Terry and Edgar here, and I'm going to turn it over to Terry now.
Great, thank you, Natalie. We wanted to start by sharing with you that this presentation is one that we created and performed first for a live audience for the Maryland State Department of Education invited principal guests. At that time, we asked the live audience, what words come to mind when you think of distributed leadership? The word cloud indicates a number of their responses. The one that came up the most, you get some, they do too. Other popular answers included collaboration, team, shared, share, trust, and vision.
So after we did that word cloud, we did a balloon activity, and I'd like you to imagine sitting around a conference table with members of your leadership team, and as you're sitting there, you're identifying school priorities and writing those school priorities on a balloon. You toss one of those balloons into the group and ask them to keep the balloon up in the air, not allowed to hit the ground. Now that looks easy. Balloon's bouncing around. There's 4 or 5 people sitting around the table. But then you put another one in, and then another one, and then another one, all with the same directions of keeping the balloons up in the air. And pretty soon, heart rate starts to speed up. Perspiration is visible, and inevitably, balloons start to drop onto the table and fall on the floor.
Immediately after this activity, we asked participants, just as we ask you at this point, to think about and reflect on the 4 domains of rapid school improvement. Within the 4 domains of rapid school improvement, there's one domain, turnaround leadership, which is the one that leaders have the most within their control. Subdomains within turnaround leadership include prioritize improvement and communicate urgency, monitor short and long-term goals, and customize and target support to meet needs. As evidenced during the balloon activity, engaging in turnaround leadership and all of the other functions and activities within a turnaround leadership environment are challenging, if not impossible, to do alone, which is why the balloon activity was a metaphor for the importance of engaging teams. After which, we invited participants once again to share their thoughts about distributed leadership after completing the balloon activity.
And by evidence of the word cloud, you can see that in such a short time, the shift in thinking from the idea of you get some, they do too, and accountability to the ideas of communication, trust, teamwork coming to the foreground.
Our objectives for the session: by attending this workshop, participants will, 1, learn why and how to implement effective distributed leadership practices to support rapid school improvement. 2, learn about the research on and effective strategies for implementing distributed leadership. 3, be introduced to a distributed leadership observation tool that they can use to measure distributed leadership practices during meetings. And 4, to hear from a successful turnaround leader about using distributed leadership in a turnaround context. The slide on the screen now refers to a publication from the Center on School Turnaround that summarizes actions taken by principals trying to lead turnaround. The topics of vision, goals, data, changed leadership, teachers and leaders, instruction, and strategic partnerships represent vast buckets of activities that principals engage in. And we shared this as a starting point for thinking about what activities might be shared among leaders within your building. At this point, we invite you to think about your school's vision. Which practices should be aligned under the shared vision? How will stakeholders be enlisted to lead these practices in a purposeful way? Please feel free, when we project questions on the screen, to pause and reflect and think about those questions, or turn and talk to others who may be watching the video with you. When we posed that question or asked Principal Edgar to think about the framework for School 22, he created what appears to be an org chart showing the various teams that function within his school. Edgar?
And what we're looking at here really is the distributive leadership framework that we have at Junior High School 22. Starting with the supervisionaries. And I use the word supervisionaries as an illustration and also a play off the word supervisors, who perhaps traditionally are the ones who are watching and making sure things happen. But if you think of their true function, that supervisors provide a supervision. In fact, I think at the core of our work is to be supervisionaries, to be able to see the possibilities of the work that we're doing beyond the moment into the future, and create the systems and structures to be able to bring those visions into reality. And you'll see that we have, at Junior High School 22, we have some parallel teams and some vertical teams. We have two large teacher team leadership groups. One is a content team that comprises 4 content leaders. The other is a grade team leaders team that comprises leaders from 2 each of the teams on 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. The supervisionaries meet every other week with content team leaders and grade team leaders, whereas content teams themselves meet with their leaders twice a week, and grade teams, as you notice, in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, meet with their teams 3 times per week.
So the framework for distributed leadership that Principal Lin shared was not presented for the purpose of having every school in America replicate it exactly as is. Instead, it was shared as an example of how Principal Lin has attempted to translate the technical challenges within his school into results. So this slide is showing that technical components like evidence of research-based activities, for example, or bringing in experts, professional development experts, or adopting frameworks and creating plans, improvement plans, and having manuals and tools and protocols that are consistent are undoubtedly important. And for most schools in our work, we could send an email and have the principal share all of these things in the form of an email. And just like the distributed leadership framework on the slide below, can't and shouldn't be replicated in every school. At the same time, these technical components, if replicated, won't achieve the same results in every school.
In fact, the only way to achieve the desired results is to attend to the adaptive challenges that each of the technical pieces of our work bring. So how do we ensure that there's a cascading message that everybody hears with the intention that we intended? How do we make sure that the leaders' influence aligned with our vision, our mission, our beliefs, our values, and our goals? How do we ensure buy-in to commitments and agreements, and that our school community, members of our school community, are accountable and responsible for those commitments and for those agreements, and for a real understanding of the work that we've all agreed to undertake, and provide each other with real and honest feedback about the work that we're all doing in order for all of us to move forward. And so the way that we've done this at Junior High School 22, which we like to call instead Team 22, is through a distributive leadership framework that really, in large part, came out of us doing the balloon activity together and feeling in a real visceral way the magnitude of the work of school. And once everybody felt that, it was amazing to see the commitment and energy that teacher leaders had to ensure consistency of the work that we do in our building throughout all of our teams. So here's a great quote. I didn't make this quote up. It comes from the work of the Arbiter Institute and the book Outward Mindset. It says, when there's a problem, it's my problem, and I'm the problem. At first, that was really hard for anyone to say, but we've realized here at Team 22 that that's actually a liberating statement because it allows us to be empowered and take charge of the work that we do.
So in thinking about this, how Principal Lin has used distributed leadership in his school and in reviewing research on distributed leadership, he tried to find a definition to share with the field. And instead, we ended up sort of pulling on different aspects and creating a new one with 4 key pieces, which we'll break down for you shortly. But the definition reads, enlisting others to advance a vision through the purposeful alignment of practices that are grounded in shared mission, beliefs, values, and goals. We also looked at distinguishing characteristics of distributed leadership and invite you to consider these particular characteristics in relation to your school. First, within a school, distributed leadership often takes the form of an instructional leadership team. The team represents the larger school community, and each team member is involved because of their content and pedagogical expertise rather than their years of experience or formal leadership role in the school. Again, I invite you to pause and reflect on that as needed before we advance, and Principal Lin will read the next one.
The second distinguishing characteristic is that DL teams take on several important tasks in a school. At 22, we don't have a committee or a team for every single initiative or piece of work that we're working to push forward, that our content teams and our grade teams, in fact, work in parallel to ensure that the work gets pushed forward, and that these teams then support the development of high-quality teaching by leading content-specific grade-level collaborative time, engage teachers in cycles of observation, feedback, and reflection. They teach and model how to apply a continuous improvement mindset, and also model the tracking and monitoring of student-level data to ensure school-wide student progress, while at the same time working together to identify and provide relevant job-embedded professional learning support.
The third distinguishing characteristic, principals and assistant principals are critical to enabling and sustaining the work of distributed leadership teams. They do this by building the leadership capacity in the school and by creating the conditions where expertise can be spread across the school so that everyone can work individually and collectively to improve outcomes for students. And again, I think back to the distributed leadership framework that Principal Lin shared and the importance of supervisionaries playing that role.
The fourth and final distinguishing characteristic is that distributed leadership is not about dividing tasks and responsibilities among individuals. That would be delegating. Instead, DL is concerned with interactions among individuals, leaders and those whom they lead, to drive instructional improvement and improve student outcomes through the development of high-quality teaching in a culture where all students can thrive, much more relational.
And so we return to the definition. This time, the definition that you're viewing is broken down into 4 component pieces. So the first, enlisting others. The second, to advance a vision. The third, through the purposeful alignment of practices. And the fourth, that are grounded in shared mission, beliefs, values, and goals. And at this point, we invite you to look at those 4 component pieces and think about sequentially, not necessarily in order of importance, but sequentially, which do you believe should come first, second, third, and fourth? And again, we invite you to pause and reflect on that as needed. For each of the component pieces, we wanted to share with you briefly some key highlights from the literature that helped with the compilation of the definition and its role in effective distributed leadership. The first, enlisting others. Leaders of sustained improvement foster iterative refinement and acceptance of a truly compelling vision for the school, one that generates continual and collective enthusiasm and eagerness to engage in elevated teaching and learning. And with that, I wanted to highlight for you the words enthusiasm and eagerness. Transformational leadership, for one, frequently doesn't include these components of enthusiasm and eagerness. Second, advance a vision. Significant literature points to school leaders as an important factor in student and school success. Successful turnaround principals share and repeat the vision to motivate others, administrators, teachers, staff, parents, and the community at large, to invest in and contribute to change. Turnaround principals craft a vision focused on student learning that is relevant, future-focused, challenging, and inspiring. The principal communicates the vision and uses it to guide and ground decisions and keep stakeholders inspired throughout the improvement effort. Again, drawing your attention to the word inspiring, which again, when coupled with the eagerness and enthusiasm from the last slide, begins to paint a picture of how distributed leadership differs from, again, transformational leadership, for example. Purposeful alignment of practices. Distributed leadership is viewed as practices rather than as formal roles, titles, or structures. This a key element of the definition and a foundational component of Spillane's work. Although there is no single accepted definition of distributed leadership, it encompasses what leaders do, the actions they take, and the activities they engage in with others. Distributed leadership is not limited to just the principal as leader, but to practices by both formal and informal leaders in a school. And last, for real and sustainable change to occur, the leader must transfer the work of problem solving onto others and resist the reflex reaction of providing people with the answers.
I think that goes back to the idea of technical and adaptive challenges in the work previously cited with Heifetz and Laurie.
And lastly, that are grounded in shared mission, beliefs, values, and goals. An important component of turnaround leadership and successful turnaround is effectively distributing leadership to solidify commitment increase collaboration, and provide faculty and staff with new challenges to keep them meaningfully engaged in a turnaround effort. Infrastructural essentials must be in place for distributed leadership to be a possibility, to presume, therefore, that any form of distributed leadership can simply self-combust into better organizational performance and outcomes without such an infrastructure being in place is just wishful thinking. Here again, we want you to think back to earlier in the presentation with the infrastructure that Principal Lin has created in his school and how that infrastructure has allowed for improvement efforts to take root.
So take a minute to think about and make connections at your own school. Which individuals and DL teams currently share in the leadership responsibilities in your context? And two, who and what teams might you create, who might you tap, and what teams might you create in the future to support the work as needed? So as we were in Maryland, I chose to reference some of the work of Brene Brown and Dare to Lead, where she talks about the idea of a square squad and the idea also of making sure that you're reflective and thoughtful about the feedback that you take. And this idea that you don't know me and you don't know Terry. A square squad is, imagine taking a piece of paper that's square inch by square inch and writing down all the names of the people whose opinions matter to you. Edgar Lin and Terry Hofer are not on there. At the same time, Brene Brown also implores us to listen with the same passion as you'd like to be heard. And so, if I might, just to take a little time to illustrate some of the work that we've done at Team 22 aligned to the definition of distributed leadership. And for us, I think the first important thing, or sequentially in fact, was to make sure that we advance a vision. And for Team 22, our vision, in fact, my vision, comes out from an old school hip hop anthem by Nas, "If I Ruled the World." And if you can imagine the beat, if I ruled the world, imagine that. It might sound something like this in schools. Imagine schools where kids be walking through the halls, no one chasing them down, busting there, starts with a B, and rhymes with halls. And that vision is a vision that we advanced as I came into the school building in March of 2013, which was in the middle of the school year. And then almost immediately, worked to create, as Terry said, the infrastructure and the conditions where we could enlist others. And in fact, this is a build it and they will come scenario, but also built through the vision of what I believe and we believe could be possible. You'll notice that these teams and this leadership where it didn't look as pretty as it does today, and in fact, some might argue that it doesn't look very pretty today either. And we were mired in a lot of technical work, but because the structures were there, The infrastructure was there. We slowly evolved and transformed our work into adaptive, to address adaptive challenges together. And then we made sure that we grounded all this work within a shared mission, beliefs, values, and goals. And we are very proud of our mission. It's very short, working together to ensure high-level learning for all. And each one of those words means something to us. Of course, working is what we are paid to do every single day. And if working was easy, it probably wouldn't be called working. And then the second thing is working together. And that's, we base a lot of our conversations around how teams are going on those very simple two words. Our mission is to work together. How is that going? And why are we working together? To ensure high-level learning for all. And for us at Team 22, high-level learning is grade-level learning aligned to standards. And when we talk about all, we mean all of our students, whether you're an English language learner, a student with disabilities, all means all. Our values at Team 22, we are the Team 22 Tigers, and Tigers roars. So our values are respectful. That's being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and feel what they feel. Organized, right place, right time. Responsible. For that, we have two definitions. The first is do the right thing without anyone telling you what you need to do. And the second is when you make a mistake, fix it. And then finally, safe, making sure that we do no harm, not only with our physical selves, but also with our words. And our school goals are also very simple. Be here and learn. That we expect all of our students to be here at least 80% of the time, and that our average school-wide attendance is 95%. I will say that when I first arrived at the school, our average daily attendance was 85%. We are now, for the last 3 years, for school in the South Bronx, New York City, I'm averaging well over 93% average daily attendance. And of course, to learn. And so our learn goal, we call it 80-80, that 80% of students who are here 80% of the time, which if we match that with our Be Here goal, which is 100% of our students, will show significant progress towards standard mastery or standard mastery. And we measure that via a diagnostic proficiency cycle in all of our 4 content areas. And then finally, kind of the purposeful alignment of practices. I think is really about a through line in all the things that we do. So our content and grade teams are responsible for pushing many of these initiatives. 22 are our plays aligned to the Danielson framework, 1A, 1E, 2A, 2D, 3B, C, and D. They're the actual do's, a blueprint of our practices, and a blueprint of what we do that make our practices consistent and visible. Therapeutic crisis interventions, for example, is the work that we working towards to ensure that our interactions with students are appropriate and therapeutic. Camps is how we create clear behavioral expectations in our classrooms. Inquiry cycles, self-explanatory, and we follow the meeting-wise framework, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the ways that we keep track and monitor of our work. And then finally, the way that we recruit teacher follows the work of the Habermas Foundation STAR Teacher Interview Protocol, where we are looking specifically for mindset and for specific mindsets of teachers who have demonstrated success in schools in our context.
So we wanted to, given all of that, you had an opportunity to learn more about how Principal Lin sort of translates distributed leadership and what it looks like and feels like in his school, in his context, in his setting. What we wanted to do as part of this, though, was to provide you with a technical tool that could be useful and helpful for distributing leadership in your school. It's not a tool that you need to use word for word, precisely, exactly, but it's a tool that we think may help to drive the right kinds of conversations and the right kinds of work in your school.
So for those of you who might be familiar with the work of DataWise out of Harvard and also the work of Peter Lencioni in Death by Meeting, our rolling agenda template follows some of those ideas to ensure that we are doing the right work and being responsible for that work as well. And if you can see, there are certain elements of the agenda and the tool. I'm looking for adherence to a protocol, making sure that our roles, everyone has a role, there are norms, and that objectives are clear with identification of decision topics. Spend some time looking at next action review, which means reviewing the commitments from the prior meeting, status updates from each of the diverse teams that are at the table, making sure that we have updates, that we hear and learn from each other's accomplishments, as well as sharing some of those challenges, which then lead us to the next part of the agenda, which is surfacing and resolving tensions. One of the reasons why meetings are sometimes difficult is because there's no drama. And so we work to create drama by identifying tensions that need to be resolved, and together work to resolve those tensions, sometimes through a protocol like a consultancy, for example. And then finally, being clear about the decisions that we make and the next steps, what, who, and completed by then, and ending with a reflection, a plus or delta. And these are things that are specific around the process of the meeting, what went well with the meeting that we need to make sure that we keep in mind and keep doing, and what are some changes that we can put forth next meeting to make sure that the meeting runs smoother and with the hopes of being more productive.
So school leaders spend a great deal of their day giving feedback to staff, giving feedback to students, giving feedback to parents, and we felt that it was important that we think about distributed leadership in a way that provides opportunity for school leaders to also receive feedback. So the accompanying observation tool that's shown here is designed to provide a space for leaders to receive feedback. And it's set up in a very simple way. Across the top, there are columns with meeting elements and criteria that align to the agenda template that Principal Lin just shared, followed by a space for jotting down observations, and then notes about what the leader should keep doing, what the leader may want to start doing, and then finally a column for any wonderings. And so we introduced this tool as an opportunity for feedback to be provided from either process observers within your meetings, leadership coaches who you may be working with, or even staff from a district office who may be sitting in and observing. And so
it's also useful as a reminder for our own meeting, and within the MeetingWise framework, we always have a norm tracker, and at times we use the tool to make sure that we are on track and making sure that we are aligned with our work.
So finally, we share one more question that we invite you to pause and reflect on, which is this: how will you oversee the work of the individuals and distributed leadership teams to enlist others to advance a vision through the purposeful alignment of practices that are grounded in shared mission, beliefs, values, and goals? So if you felt like some of the ideas and concepts that were shared today were useful, again, we invite you to spend some time alone and with team members reflecting on this question.
Thank you,
Natalie?
Terry and Edgar. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Terry and Edgar, for sharing so much useful information, sharing some of the practical examples of how, Edgar, you implemented the practices, as well as some of the research behind the ideas that you shared. I hope that our participants will find today's webinar and information that was shared today on distributed leadership useful. I invite them to visit our website, which is listed at the bottom of this screen, for more resources and more information about the REL Mid-Atlantic. You can find, as I said, you can find other resources, and you can also find links to other events that the RELs are hosting, and you can register for those events. So thanks again to everyone for listening and participating in today's webinar, and thanks again to Terry and Edgar.